There is a quiet moment that comes to many of us, somewhere in the later years of life, when we look back across the long road we have traveled and feel, perhaps for the first time, that we have arrived somewhere, that the learning is behind us, that the years of study and effort and striving have settled into something solid, something finished, like a book that has finally been closed and placed gently on a shelf. It is a natural feeling. It is, in many ways, an understandable one. We live in a world that associates learning with youth. We picture classrooms filled with young faces. We imagine learning as something that requires fresh eyes, quick minds, and the energy of someone just beginning. And so, when the years have grown long and the hair has grown white, many of us quietly step aside from the idea of learning as though it were a seat meant for someone younger, someone who needs it more. But I want to sit with you today, quietly, the way one sits with an old friend on a still afternoon. I want to speak with you not about what you have not yet learned, but about what learning truly is. Because I believe, with great sincerity, that the most meaningful learning of a human life does not belong to the young. It belongs to those who are still willing to be awake. And that is something that age, far from taking away, can deepen in us beyond anything we once imagined. Confucius, that ancient teacher who walked the roads of China long centuries ago, once said something that has stayed with me across many years of reflection. He spoke of a man who at 15 had his heart set on learning. At 30, he stood firm. At 40, he had no doubts. At 50, he understood the decrees of heaven. At 60, his ear was an obedient organ for the reception of truth. At 70, he could follow what his heart desired without transgressing what was right. What is remarkable about these words is not that they describe achievements. What is remarkable is that they describe a man who never stopped. At every decade of life, something new was opening. Something new was being understood. The learning did not end. It changed. It deepened. It became something altogether different from what it had been at the beginning. This is what I wish to explore with you today. Not learning as effort, not learning as a task to be completed, but learning as a way of being alive, as a quality of attention, as the simple, quiet act of remaining open to what life still has to say. We often speak of experience as though it replaces the need for learning. We say, I have lived long enough to know. I have seen enough to understand. And in many ways, this is true. Experience is a great teacher. The person who has lived through grief knows something about grief that no book can fully capture. The person who has raised children or tended a garden through many seasons or watched friends grow old and pass away carries a kind of knowledge that is earned rather than studied. This is real. This matters. But experience, as precious as it is, can also become a kind of wall. We can begin to see only what we already expect to see. We can hear only what confirms what we already believe. Experience becomes a lens, and lenses, if we are not careful, can distort as much as they clarify. The very richness of a long life can sometimes make us less curious, not more. We have seen so much, we have lived so much, and so, without quite realizing it, we begin to assume that we already know the shape of things. This is the quiet danger that Confucius understood. It is not ignorance that closes the mind. It is the comfortable certainty of a life well lived. And so the practice of learning, even in the later years, even after all that experience, is not about adding more knowledge to what we already have. It is about keeping the door open. It is about remaining, in the deepest sense of the word, a student. What does it mean to be a student in the later years of life? I want to think about this carefully because I believe it looks quite different from what we might first imagine. When we are young, learning is often about acquisition. We gather facts, skills, languages, qualifications. We collect pieces of knowledge the way a traveler might collect stamps in a passport. There is urgency to it. There is ambition. We learn in order to become something, to achieve something, to prove something. This is not wrong. This is appropriate for that season of life. The young need to build. They need to fill themselves up with the materials of the world. But in the later years, something shifts, or rather, something has the potential to shift if we allow it. The learning of older age is less about gathering and more about seeing. It is less about answers and more about questions. It is slower. It is quieter. It asks more of us in one sense because it requires a kind of humility that is harder to maintain when we have spent decades being capable, being experienced, being the ones who know. To learn in the later years is to be willing, occasionally, to not know. To encounter something familiar and realize there is still something in it you have not yet understood. To listen to someone younger or someone very different from yourself and find that they are saying something true that you had not considered before. This is not diminishment. This is a deepening. This is the kind of learning that the young often cannot yet access because they have not yet lived long enough to know how much they do not know. I think of the way light falls on water. When we are young, we see the surface. We see the shimmer and the movement. It is beautiful, and it captures our attention completely. But as the years pass, if we have been paying attention, we begin to see beneath the surface. We begin to notice the currents underneath, the way the light bends differently at different depths, the way what appears still on the surface may be moving quite intensely below. This is not because our eyes have grown sharper. It is because our willingness to look longer has grown deeper. This is what experience does when it is accompanied by openness. It does not replace learning. It gives learning a richer ground to grow in. Let me speak about something very simple, something you may have done many times in your life. The act of walking outside on an ordinary morning. When we are young, a morning walk is often purposeful. We are going somewhere. We are getting exercise. We are passing through the world on our way to the next thing. The birds are background. The sky is background. The wind against our face is simply weather. But something can happen in the later years if we allow it. The walk slows down, not always because our bodies demand it, though sometimes that too, but because something in us has begun to notice more. The bird on the fence post becomes worth stopping for. The way the light comes through the leaves in early morning becomes something almost worth crying for, not out of sadness, but out of a kind of recognition. The world is beautiful. It has always been beautiful. But we were often too busy to truly see it. This noticing, this slowing down enough to be genuinely present to an ordinary moment, this is learning. It does not come from a book or a classroom. It does not require a teacher or a curriculum. It requires only attention. And attention, it turns out, is something that can grow richer with age if we tend it. Confucius spoke often of this quality of attention. He believed that a person who was truly learning was always looking, always listening, always willing to receive what the moment had to offer. He said that when you know a thing, to hold that you know it, and when you do not know a thing, to allow that you do not know it. This is knowledge. This simple, honest acknowledgement of the boundary between what we know and what we do not know. This is the beginning of real wisdom. And it is something that becomes more possible as we age. Because we have tried for so many years to know everything, to be certain, to have answers. And life, in its patient and sometimes difficult way, has shown us that certainty is not always the gift we imagined it to be. Some of the things we were most sure of have turned out to be incomplete. Some of the people we thought we understood perfectly have surprised us. Some of the beliefs we held most tightly have had to be gently released, or at least held more loosely when the years brought us new information. This is not failure. This is education of the deepest kind. Every time life has shown us that we were wrong about something or incomplete in our understanding, it has offered us an invitation to remain open, an invitation to keep learning. I want to speak now about something that may seem small, but which I think carries great importance: the act of listening. I want to speak now about something that may seem small, but which I think carries great importance: the act of listening. As we grow older, we are often in the position of being the ones who speak. We have things to say. We have stories, wisdom, experience that others have not yet accumulated. And there is value in sharing these things. The transmission of what has been learned across generations is one of the great gifts that older people offer to the world. But there is a quieter gift, one that is sometimes overlooked: the gift of genuinely listening. Not listening in order to respond, not listening while waiting for a pause where we can insert our own story, but truly, openly listening, as though the person speaking might have something to teach us, even if they are younger, even if they seem to know less than we do, even if what they are saying challenges what we have always believed. This kind of listening is, in its own way, a form of learning, and it is one of the most difficult disciplines of later life, because by the time we have lived many decades, our habits of mind are well established. We have patterns of thought, we have frameworks through which we interpret the world, and these frameworks are useful. They help us navigate, but they can also become filters that keep out the new, the unexpected, the surprising. To listen deeply, to truly allow another person's words to reach us, and perhaps disturb us a little, to sit with that disturbance rather than quickly resolving it back into what we already believe, this is a form of courage. And it is a form of learning. There is a beautiful idea in Confucian thought that the superior person is not the one who knows the most, but the one who is most genuinely engaged in the process of becoming. The word in Chinese is junzi, and while it is often translated simply as gentleman or superior person, what it really points to is someone who is always in motion, always refining, always open to the possibility of becoming more truly themselves. The junzi never stops learning, not because they are lacking, but because they understand that life is not a problem to be solved, but a depth to be sounded. This, I believe, is a beautiful way to understand what learning means in the later years of life. Not filling a gap, not fixing an inadequacy, but sounding a depth, going further into what it means to be alive, to be human, to be present to this extraordinary and ordinary world. Let me speak for a moment about the way our relationship to knowledge changes as we age. When we are young, knowledge feels like power. The more we know, the more capable we are. The more we understand, the more control we have over our circumstances. Knowledge is a tool. It is something we wield. But as the years pass, something begins to shift. We start to realize that there are things that cannot be known, or at least cannot be fully known, not because we are not clever enough, but because they are genuinely beyond the grasp of the mind alone. The nature of suffering and why it falls where it does. The mystery of why some people flourish and others struggle. The question of what we are beneath all the roles and histories and identities we have accumulated. These are not questions that more information can answer. And so, in the later years, knowledge sometimes gives way to something quieter, something that might be called understanding. And understanding is not the same thing as knowing. Knowing is about facts, information, correct answers. Understanding is about something else entirely. Understanding is about depth of relationship with what we have encountered. It is about having lived with something long enough, turned it over enough times in the light of experience, that we begin to see it not just from the outside, but from within. We understand grief not because we have read about it, but because we have lived through it. We understand kindness, not because someone defined it for us, but because we have felt its presence and its absence in our own lives. We understand patience not as a virtue described in a book, but as something we have had to practice imperfectly over many years, falling short and trying again. This kind of understanding is what the later years of life have the potential to cultivate. And it requires learning, a very particular kind of learning that is more about presence than accumulation, more about depth than breadth, more about being genuinely moved by the truth of something than about adding it to a list of things we know. I want to say something now that may surprise you, or perhaps it will simply give words to something you have already felt but not yet fully named. The older we become, the more clearly we may see that learning is not something we do, it is something we allow. It is less an action and more a posture of openness, of curiosity without grasping, of attention without agenda. A child does not decide to be fascinated by a caterpillar. The fascination simply happens. The child looks, and something in the looking becomes alive. This is what we call beginner's mind in certain contemplative traditions. The mind that approaches everything, even the familiar, as though seeing it for the first time. As adults, and especially as experienced adults, we often lose this quality. We see a caterpillar and we think, yes, that is a caterpillar, and we move on. We have categorized it. We have filed it away. We do not stop. We do not look, because we already know. But what if we stopped? What if we looked again? Not to learn the scientific name, not to add to our knowledge of insects, but simply to be genuinely present to this small, slow creature making its way across a leaf. What might we notice that we have never noticed before? What might arise in us if we gave it enough time? This kind of looking, slow, patient, unpurposeful, is not something that the busy years of life often allow. But the later years, if we are fortunate enough to have some spaciousness in them, can offer us this gift. The gift of time to look, time to listen, time to sit with a question without rushing to an answer. Confucius walked among ordinary things. He found meaning not only in the great events of history, but in the simple transactions of daily life. A meal shared with a friend, a conversation in a garden, the behavior of water, which always seeks the lowest place, and in doing so nourishes everything. He believed that the truth was not hidden in some distant or elevated place. It was here, in the midst of ordinary life, waiting to be noticed by whoever had the attention and the humility to see it. This is such an encouraging idea for those of us in the later years. We do not need to climb a mountain or journey to a distant teacher to continue learning. The learning is available to us right where we are, in our own gardens, in our own kitchens, in our own memories, when we sit with them quietly and ask what more they might have to teach us. Because memories are not finished, you know. We often treat them as fixed, as facts of the past. Something happened, and we know what it means, and that is the end of it. But memories are living things in a way. They change as we change. The meaning of something that happened when we were 30 may look quite different when we consider it at 70, because we have become different people. We have grown, we have lost. We have been surprised by life in ways that have rearranged our understanding. To revisit an old memory with fresh eyes, to ask whether we have understood it completely, whether there is something in it we missed or misinterpreted or judged too quickly. This is a form of learning. It requires honesty. It requires a willingness to be changed by what we find. But it is the kind of learning that only the years can make possible. The young do not yet have the distance to see their own stories clearly. But we do, or at least we have the possibility of it. Let me speak now about something that is sometimes difficult to talk about. The matter of changing our minds. For many people, particularly those who have lived long and thought carefully about the world, there is a kind of vulnerability in admitting that something we believed for a long time may not have been entirely right. We have built lives around certain convictions. We have made choices based on certain values. and to consider that those convictions or values might need revision can feel, in some moments, like a threat to everything we have been. But I want to suggest something different. The willingness to change one's mind when new understanding genuinely calls for it is not a sign of weakness. It is one of the most courageous and rare forms of intellectual integrity. It is the mark of a truly educated person. Not educated in the sense of having credentials, but educated in the deeper sense of being genuinely responsive to the truth. Confucius was not a man who was afraid to be wrong. He taught his students not by proclaiming authority, but by thinking alongside them, asking questions, reconsidering his own positions when a student offered a perspective he had not considered. He modeled the very openness he was trying to cultivate in others. And this is why his teaching has lasted across so many centuries. Not because he was always right, but because he was always genuinely engaged in the search for what was right. When we reach a place in life where we are willing to say, "I believed this for a long time, and I am now beginning to see it differently," we are doing something profound. We are affirming that truth matters more to us than the comfort of being consistent. We are placing the pursuit of understanding above the need to appear certain. And we are demonstrating, perhaps more eloquently than any words could, that we have not stopped learning. This is deeply connected to something else I want to say about the nature of wisdom. We often speak of wisdom as though it were a possession, something some people have and others do not, something accumulated over time, like furniture in a house. But I do not think wisdom works that way. I do not think it can be accumulated and then held on to. Wisdom, in the Confucian sense, is not a noun. It is more like a verb. It is something that is happening or not happening in any given moment. It is the quality of being genuinely present to what is real, what is true, what is needed right now in this situation, with this person in this moment. And because life keeps changing, because every moment is new in some way, wisdom must be continually renewed. It cannot be stored and retrieved. It must be lived. This is why the learning never ends. Not because we are perpetually inadequate, not because there is always something more to know, but because life itself is always presenting us with something new, something that calls for fresh attention, something that cannot be adequately met by yesterday's understanding alone. The water in the river is always new, even when the river looks the same. Every morning that we wake, we are waking into something slightly different from what was there before. The people we love have changed overnight, even if only imperceptibly. The world has shifted. We ourselves are not quite who we were. And wisdom, real wisdom, is the capacity to meet this newness with appropriate freshness, with eyes that, however long they have been open, have not yet lost the ability to truly see. I want to come now to something that I feel is very close to the heart of what we are speaking about today. It is the relationship between learning and love. It may seem unexpected to bring love into a conversation about learning, but I believe they are deeply connected. When we love something or someone genuinely, we never stop learning about them. We remain curious. We remain open. We do not presume that we have understood them completely, because love knows that every person, every living thing, is an inexhaustible depth. There is always more. And I wonder if this is not the right relationship to have with life itself. To love it, to remain curious about it, to approach it not as something we have mastered, but as something we are in relationship with, something that will continue to surprise us and teach us if we remain present to it. The person who has loved a garden for many decades knows that the garden never stops teaching. Every season brings new questions. Every problem brings new learning. The soil is different this year than last year. The seeds that thrived before are struggling now. And the gardener who has been paying attention for many years does not simply apply what they already know. They observe. They adjust. They remain open to what the garden itself is trying to say. This is learning as relationship, and it is perhaps the most sustainable and the most deeply satisfying kind. Not learning as a means to an end, but learning as an expression of genuine care, of genuine interest, of genuine love for the extraordinary, stubborn, beautiful, difficult, astonishing fact of being alive. There is a kind of peace that can come from this understanding, a peace that is different from complacency, different from the peace of thinking we have arrived or finished. It is the peace of knowing that we do not need to arrive, because the journey itself is the destination. The learning is not in service of some future state of completion. The learning is the life. And this, I believe, is one of the deepest gifts that the later years can offer if we receive them with the right spirit. We are no longer building towards something. We are no longer striving to become. In many ways, we have already become. We are already here. And being already here, we are free to learn, not for any reason, not in order to get anywhere, but simply because the world is interesting and beautiful, and still, even now, full of things we have not yet understood. There is a student who came to a great teacher many years ago and asked, "What is left to learn when one has already learned so much?" And the teacher was quiet for a while. Then he said, "Look out the window." The student looked. There was a tree, an ordinary tree, the same tree that stood outside the window every day. The student had passed it 100 times. "What do you see?" the teacher asked. "A tree," said the student, and the teacher smiled. "Keep looking," he said. The student looked for a long time, and slowly, something began to happen. The student began to see not just a tree, but a particular tree, shaped by particular winds over particular years. The student began to notice the way the light was moving through its leaves differently now than a moment ago. The student began to notice the birds in its branches and the way the bark had been marked by time and the shadows it cast and the space it occupied among the other trees and the sky. The student looked for a long time without speaking, and when at last the student turned back to the teacher, something had changed. Not in the tree, in the student. This is what learning can be, even after many years of living. It is not a adding something new. It is a seeing more deeply into what has always been there. It is the discovery, not for the first time, but for a new time, that the world is far richer than we had realized. That even the most familiar things contain depths we have not yet explored. That there is always more. And this is not a discouraging thought. It is not an invitation to feel inadequate or behind. It is an invitation to remain alive, to remain genuinely, curiously, warmly, humbly alive to the world. To let the eyes stay soft, to let the ears stay open, to let the heart stay permeable. As I come to the close of what I have been wanting to say to you today, I want to leave you with something simple. Not a conclusion exactly, because this is not the kind of subject that ends, but a thought to carry with you gently, the way you might carry a smooth stone in your pocket. You have lived a long time. You have learned enormous things. You carry within you a wealth of experience and understanding that is yours alone, shaped by the particular circumstances and relationships and struggles of your particular life. This is real. This is precious. This should never be dismissed or diminished. And it is not finished. You are not finished. The learning is not finished. Not because you are lacking anything, but because life is generous and it keeps offering. The morning will come again tomorrow, as it has come today, and it will bring with it something, however small, that you have not yet noticed in quite that way before. And if you are willing to be present to it, if you are willing to look at it with the kind of quiet, patient, loving attention we have been speaking about, something will happen. Something will be understood that was not understood before. Not because you are a student in the formal sense, not because you are trying to learn, but because you are awake, because you are here. Because after all these years, you have not yet stopped being curious about this strange and beautiful life. That is enough. That is in fact everything. Keep going, keep looking, keep listening. Not as effort, not as duty, but as the quiet, natural expression of a mind that is still alive, still open, still genuinely engaged with the extraordinary privilege of being present in this world. The teacher is always still teaching. The question is only whether we are still willing to be students, and I believe you are. I believe that is, in part, why you are here, listening to these words, letting them settle into the long, rich, still unfolding story of your life. May you continue to learn. May the learning bring you not more information, but more understanding. Not more certainty, but more peace. Not more answers, but a deeper and more grateful relationship with the questions. The journey continues, and that in the end is a very beautiful thing.